we are going to be talking about how you can advocate for voting rights legislation from your hometown. Next slide. The bill of the month it's called the People Over Long Lines Act, and it has been introduced in both the Senate and in the House. In the Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon has introduced it, and there are only two co-sponsors in the Senate. That means there's lots of opportunities for us to add more co-sponsors. The companion bill, H.R. 5291 by Nikema Williams in the House, has 58 co-sponsors. So again, there's 435 of them over there in the House. There is a tremendous opportunity to gain co-sponsors. Now, what does the People Over Long Lines Act do? Well, it basically says that voters will not wait more than 30 minutes at any polling place to vote in a federal election. Remember, Congress can only control federal elections. If it is elections for your state house and local, federal government doesn't control that. So you will wait no longer than 30 minutes. We all remember the images from Georgia where people were waiting 5, 6, 7 hours in line to cast their ballot. And our buddies at Black Voters Matter, they were giving them water and free pizza. And then in the next legislative cycle, Georgia passed a law that said you can't give food or drink to people standing in line to vote. Let's keep them uncomfortable. Let's keep them hungry. Well, this new law says people only wait a maximum of 30 minutes. And if the wait is longer, the citizens who are experiencing these long waits have the right to take action. Think, file a lawsuit and sue them and demand that they fix the problem, which frankly is artificially created. It also allows the Election Assistance Commission to make payments to eligible states. Think states with a lot of rural communities that are low wealth communities who maybe can't afford to buy new scanners or whatever voting equipment has been mandated. This would help defray that cost. So we don't have the money to buy the equipment, or we don't have the money to hire the poll workers, and that excuse gets blown out the window. It also says you're going to have the right number of amount of equipment, the appropriate number of trained poll workers, and the Department of Justice will issue minimum standards of this is what it must be. So if your state, Virginia, has 45 days of early voting, they're probably going to require less equipment in polling locations than say a state like Alabama that only has voting on election day. And now this is another big one for me. It also prohibits the election administrators from actually being a political candidate in the election. People are going, what? Just think Brian Kemp in Georgia, Secretary of State, while running for governor of Georgia. So in other words, he's in charge of counting the votes and he's running for office. Next slide. Now, you're all going to get this. There are 58 co-sponsors in the House. So what I did was I broke it down by states, and which states have the most co-sponsors. So if you're in South Carolina, you can contact any member of Congress. They are not a co-sponsor yet. California, 11 members in California are co-sponsors. I've got a lot of opportunity in Virginia because in Virginia, I only have two of my members, Jen McClellan and Bobby Scott, who are co-sponsors. And we have a lot more opportunity than that. Now, who are the Senate co-sponsors? Well, you've got Ron Wyden, who introduced the bill. Ron Wyden's partner, Jeff Merkley, is also a co-sponsor, as is Mazie Hirono of Hawaii. After that, the field is open. They are not yet co-sponsors. Next slide. We've drafted the April letters for you. There is a letter if your member of Congress is already a co-sponsor. We are thanking them for being a co-sponsor. And then we have the other letter if your member is not a co-sponsor. So all you're going to need to do is take the letter and then address it, dear Senator, if you're going to a senator office, or dear representative, if you're going to a House office. And you will get the letters in a follow-up email. So basically, when I describe to you what the bill does, that's exactly what the letter says. So next slide. Again, our messaging on voting, we want to be very, very clear, no matter what your race or your background or what zip code you live in. We believe that if democracy is working or going to work, it has to be available to all of us. And everybody has to have the freedom to vote. And disenfranchisement by long lines, by not enough machines, or any of these artificial means that they're coming up with is completely unacceptable. And just like judges are supposed to recuse themselves if they have any involvement whatsoever in a case that they're supposed to hear and rule on, candidates for office should not be running an election while they are a candidate for office that they are in charge of during that election.
It's sort of crazy that we're at this point in our country. I mean, one would think that this would be common sense, but clearly it is not, because there are candidates that are running the elections in which they're running, and this has happened. And so we need to do something about it. And what Andrew is talking about right now is really critical. This bill right now, the U.S. Election Assistance Commission has been showing a dramatic decline in the number of election day polling places. In fact, in 2024, there will be 100,000 fewer election day polling places. You heard that correctly. 100,000 fewer election day polling places in 2024 than there were in 2022. Take a look at this article. This is something we'll also send in the follow-up email, but this is a disturbing trend. And friends, it's a form of voter suppression. This is weaponizing administration and financing for the purpose of keeping some people in long lines and discouraged or unable to vote. But we can change it. And that's why we have this wonderful bill from Representative Nikema Williams. She was hoping to be able to be with us tonight and at the last minute was unable, but we are still here with this important bill that she's carried forward. And today, in just a little few moments, we're going to have the chance to think about how we're going to advocate for this bill when we meet with our members of Congress.
All right. Josie, next slide. Now, you've heard us talking on a number of these. Now we want to hear from you. So Noelle, let's kind of get people ready.
Oh,
And what we're going to be doing next. This is new.
you bet. We've been holding these How to Be an Effective Advocate monthly sessions for 4 months. This is our 4th month, and we have had over 870 people participate in these trainings, and we are absolutely thrilled about that. But here's the thing. We know it's easy to learn about the bill, and especially if you've never made a visit to a member of Congress before, that you might want to think about it for a while before you do it. But eventually, we want to make sure that you feel confident and equipped to actually make a visit. Now, some of you on this call are seasoned advocates. You've made visits before. Others are brand new. Some of you, it might even be your first time. So tonight, we'd like to, in real time, hear back from you through an anonymous Zoom poll that we're going to do right now. You're going to have 3 minutes to answer some very simple questions about your attendance here and whether or not you've made a visit and why. No worries, this is not a guilt trip. This is actually, we want to hear from you because we want to make sure that what we're providing to you is really working for you. Because at the end of the day, we have to get beyond the Zoom and into those meetings with members of Congress. So if you would, take 3 minutes with us now and answer this quick citizen advocacy check-in poll. Josie, is there a particular way for them to answer? Has that been dropped in the chat? Oh, I see it going. I see it
It's
going now.
live.
It's
Right,
live.
right.
We see it.
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent. I love this.
All right. Yes,
Look at
yes. A number
this.
of people have made visits.
This is wonderful. We hear you. Some of you who are nervous, don't worry. We all get nervous and we're going to help you overcome it. Great. I need more practice. All right.
Yes, yes,
Look at this. 80% of you have actually, this is wonderful, made a visit.
yes, yes. It's great.
Yeah.
All
This
right.
is great. This is so helpful for us because,
Yes,
we can encourage, but then this is your chance to tell us how it's going.
right.
Wonderful. We've got a lot of people who it's their first time, and we're really glad you're here. I'm doing a shout out to my dad, who I saw. Hi, Dad. My dad jumped on. Um,
Oh,
so glad you're here. All right, we've got third time. Wow, this is wonderful.
and we've got a lot of new people as well.
We do. If this is your first time with us, we just did a super short, super simple bill really quickly because we're going to get to something in just a minute that we hope you'll really enjoy. Should I let the cat out of the bag,
Oh,
Hannah?
you can let the cat out of the
I'm
bag.
going to let the
Since
cat out of the bag.
82% of the people said they need more practice.
Yes. And we hear you. I see a 28 said too busy, not enough time. That's true. That's true. That happens. Legislation, a little bit more about the legislation. Okay. And we're going to save these results so that we can make sure to keep shaping this program so that it gets you what you need to take the next step. So I'm going to let the cat out of the bag. Here we go. In the next section, we're actually going to role play for you 2 example visits for meeting with your elected officials around the People Above Long Lines Act. So this would be, you can imagine yourself making your appointment and going in. We'll show you all the different roles. And then we'll think through together. And at the end of each one, there'll be plenty of time for you to do Q&A. You can say, oh, what about this? What about that? And then we'll review some of those best practices. And our hope is that by doing a role play, you'll get a little bit more of a feel and for how these visits go. And I hope you'll feel even more confident, because honestly, once you get a visit or two under your belt, you're going to say, wow, what was I so nervous about? This is really great. And you'll get that sense of power, and you'll be building a relationship with your elected official, and it'll be great. So why don't we end the poll? I think we have most people have responded now. So have you made a congressional visit meeting yet? And 31% of you, yes, excellent. 69% of you, no, that's okay. Don't worry about it. We'll get you there. Would you like more practice? Yes, overwhelmingly need more practice. Busy schedules, wanted to know more about the legislation, more practice. Some of you are nervous. It's okay. Don't worry. And this is an important one. The office is too far away or no transportation. Remember that you can also meet by Zoom in your district office. So it's sort of a conundrum, right? But we now have Zoom, and most district offices will be able to set that up so that you can meet that way. Because, honestly, some of us live in states where it is a tremendous distance to the district office. All right. I'm so glad that many of you are very likely. Some of you are in the middle yet. You're thinking, okay, I'm getting ready to do this, visiting. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, let's stop sharing and let's get on to some role play. What do you say, Andrea?
I'm ready.
Okay, and we're going to bring in two of our wonderful colleagues at the Center for Common Ground, Josie and John. Hello, hello. Many of you know John because he is oversees and facilitates the democracy centers, and many of you know Josie because of all of the work that she does. Pretty much like, what don't you do, Josie? I don't know. You're always doing policy and other work, but we are going to model for you a visit to Congresswoman Andrea Miller. Okay, and we're going to do a first visit, and then we'll do a second visit. Each of us are going to take different roles. When you go as a group, it's important to have in mind what are the roles that each person is going to play. And then you practice it a little bit before you go. So I'm going to be the person that introduces the bill. I'm going to be the person that introduces the group, excuse me. And then I'm going to be the person who also takes the notes and follows up. And I'll be the person that makes the direct ask of the Congresswoman. Josie is going to be the bill educator, and John is going to be the storyteller. Okay, so imagine with us that we have made an appointment with Congresswoman Miller, and we're coming in to advocate on the People Above Long Lines at the Polls Act. Here we go.
Well,
Well,
good evening, everybody. I am so glad you were all able to stop by.
oh, thank you so much, Congresswoman Miller. My name is Noelle D'Amico, and I'm here with my colleagues from the Center for Common Ground, John Williams and Josie, and we're here today to visit with you about the People Above Long Lines at the Polls Act. Let me pass it to Josie to tell you a little bit more.
Yes, Congresswoman, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to hear about this really important bill. Now, the People Over Long Lines Act would be combating something that a lot of voters have faced, especially in 2020, which is severely long lines when trying to vote. This bill would prohibit long lines by putting a cap at 30 minutes, so voters would not be allowed to wait in line for more than 30 minutes when voting. And if they find themselves waiting for longer than that amount of time, they would have the right to take action and try to get compensation for that. Another really important thing about this bill is, well, a lot of states, possibly in your district, might not have the funding to try to combat the long lines we're facing. Well, this bill would ensure that the federal government gives your state and all other states the funding they need to make sure they're supplied with the good voting machines that are up to date and the poll workers, as well as other voting resources they might need to ensure that these lines are shorter and so that more people will come and vote. And I'm going to pass things over to my friend John to talk about why this bill is so important for people in our communities.
Thank you, Congressman Miller, for taking the time to meet with us. If I may just share a story about someone in my life who has been, who'd like to vote, who's is now a senior citizen. My mother was a nurse for over 30 years, serving the community and help rehabilitating people in their worst moments. She is now retired, and she herself has suffered an accident that has put her in a bit of a handicapped state. Now, I'm merely just speaking from as a caretaker. I think the Polls Act would help those senior citizens who cannot wait in line long enough, who might be experiencing excruciating physical pain or a disability of some sorts. I think it would be great if they wouldn't be susceptible to any further risk to their health. This would allow them to exercise their civic duty without really risking anything like that. I would like you to consider the other stories that go unheard when you think about considering signing this bill. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, John, and thank you, Josie. Normally, this is the kind of bill that I would support. I'm not on this bill. I would think I would already be a co-sponsor of this bill.
Oh, goodness. Well, we have 58 Democratic co-sponsors, but unfortunately, no Republican co-sponsors, and it doesn't appear that you're yet on the bill. We're absolutely delighted to learn that you would like to be a co-sponsor of the bill. And Representative Nikema Williams, who introduced the bill, I'm sure will be delighted to know of your support as well.
Yes, and just it total coincidence. I got a call yesterday from my old boss from years and years ago, who was telling me a story about voting in 2020 in Arkansas. He has bone cancer, and he was talking about the difficulty in standing in line for 3 hours to vote, and how there were several other senior citizens with him. And I said, you could have asked to go to the front of the line or have them bring the voting to you. And he just didn't know.
Mm. It is so reassuring to know that you understand this problem. And for those of us with the Center for Common Ground that have come to you, that are working to make sure that every single person can cast their ballot freely and fairly, and to especially make sure that people in communities who don't have polling places nearby get those polling places that they need. We just want to thank you for your support. And as a next step, will your office be reaching out to Representative Williams to sign on to the bill?
Oh, well, we will definitely reach out to Representative Williams. And I was going to ask a question. You said or implied that I would be the first Republican on the bill. Would you like me to reach out to several of my colleagues that I believe, based on the districts that they're in, they've got a lot of military veterans. They would probably be supportive if we asked the question and presented it in the correct way.
Absolutely. Please, the more Republican co-sponsors we can get, the better, because after all, voting really is an American issue. It's a bipartisan issue, and your support means the world. Thank you. And we're happy to share our stories and to connect them with others so that we can raise a strong cry for this very important bill at this time.
Well, now of the three of you, I'm going to talk to four colleagues immediately come to mind. Who should I reach out to? Or do you want me, if they are feeling willing, to just sort of send them directly to Nikema, whom I know fairly well?
Well, if you have a good relationship with Nikema, please feel free to send them directly to the Congresswoman because that's the quickest way they can get on the bill. But wherever we can be helpful, I'll be your point person for our team here. And you have my card that I'm leaving with you. I will follow up this meeting with a brief email to confirm what we've discussed and to make sure you have everything that you need at hand.
And thank you so much. And I am so glad that you reached out to me and didn't automatically dismiss me because there's an R behind my name. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
so much.
Okay, the end. So let's open it up to some questions. What are people thinking? What surprised you? What was something that you thought was important to remember? Feel free. Oh, we got a bravo. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, we're doing our little Republicans are people too. There was a period of time when they were more human than many of them are now, but there was a time when a Republican really was just more fiscally conservative than anything else.
Right. Voting rights had a very, very long consensus, a long bipartisan consensus. But
Yes.
unfortunately, recently, especially since the Supreme Court decision in 2013 that cut the heart out of the Voting Rights Act, there's really been a pushback. Ah, Donna's
Oh,
asking, no
I
pushback.
love that. All
Great.
right, Donna, I was a lobbyist on Capitol Hill from 2009 to 2019. And one of my favorite members of Congress was Republican Walter Jones. I could talk to Walter about any type of legislation, expanding Social Security, voting rights, peace legislation, jobs, and he would always listen and he would ask questions. And what I learned was that in many instances, it was how the legislation was presented to Republicans as opposed to just the legislation itself. And so I kind of became the Republican whisperer in Congress, where I would talk to Democrats and they would ask me, well, do you know any Republicans who might be supportive of this bill? And then the Republicans would say, well, I'm thinking of introducing a bill that does da 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 da. And you think of a Democrat that maybe I could introduce it with, understanding full well that if a bill in Congress or even in the states is bipartisan, that bill stands a much greater chance of ultimately passing than if it only has support from one party or another one. We're going to do another role play where I will not be nearly as supportive, but not all members of the Republican Party. Bob Good is going to be hostile. I'm sorry for you, but Bob Good is bad. But there are many that will be willing to listen. I know Rick is on this call, and we were lobbying against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We had lobbied on many other topics, and we always saw an equal number of Republicans. So if we were seeing 70 legislators on a day, 35 would be Democrats, 35 would be Republicans. And I remember it was Mo Brooks' office. Yes, that Mo Brooks. We were in there, and we would go every month. It was a letter drop. We would go each and every month. And the legislative director said, you know, you folks are in here every month. And this is the first time where, yes, I am exactly where you are. So you have got my full support. And, you know, there was a little sort of smile. It was like, keep coming back. Maybe in another 5 or 6 months, we'll find something else that we can agree on.
Andrew, I think you're emphasizing the real importance of not giving up. I mean, obviously, there are going to be some members of Congress that are going to be very difficult to persuade, but don't count anybody out and keep going, because even if you don't persuade them, they are hearing your objections then, or that they're hearing from you. That very act of making your voice heard matters. We've got a lot of great questions in the chat. And one question was, there was no pushback. Is that realistic? Sometimes that is just how it goes. It's very smooth. Other times there will be. Stay tuned for our next role play, which we're going to do.
Now here's a question, LED. Is a group necessary?
Right.
No. If you are a group of one, then you are all the roles. You are the meeting facilitator, you are the note taker, and you will be asking the question, will you support the bill? You will be all roles.
I think it's wonderful for you to go, whether you're one person or 4 people. You don't really want to get above 5 people in a meeting because it gets a little bit hard to handle. Most meetings take about 10, 15 minutes. Sometimes they can go longer if the staffer or the member of Congress has that bandwidth. And sometimes you catch them and you can have a really wonderful back and forth. But one of the things to really realize is that there's sort of strength in numbers. There are different voices and different approaches you can take. And the more that you do it, the more you can kind of get used to going together. I think there's a benefit because different people have just a different way of presenting. I mean, the story that John told was very different than my kind of let's get down to business. And Josie explained the bill. And the more people you have, the more voices you have. So it's not necessary, and that shouldn't stop you if you can't get a group together. But if you can get a group together, I think it's better.
And then there was another question that I saw. Well, there's a couple. Can this bill be passed this year? No, it will not, because the people that are strongly in support of voting rights do not have control of judiciary, and there are only 2 ways to get a bill to the floor in the House. Remember, it's got to pass both chambers. Number 1, it would need to be voted on or reported out of committee. It is in the committee. It will never have a hearing. Barring that, the only other option is, and there's a couple of them going around, a discharge petition, where basically 218 offices say, we want this bill to bypass its committee or committees and go straight to the floor so we can have a vote. The other option would be the speaker could bring the bill to the floor. Absolutely will not happen. So that's a big no on that one. And then one of the other questions was, what's the difference of meeting with a legislator versus staff? I would frequently meet with legislators because I would ambush them in the halls. Uh, but normally you talk to staff. When you are in the district office, it is a 90% chance if Congress is in session and their boss is on the Hill that you will be talking with staff. The whole idea is build that relationship. Remember, you are going to see and talk to the member maybe once a month. The staff either sees or speaks with their member on a daily basis. So if you build a good relationship with staff, then that is as good, in some instances, a little better than building a relationship with the legislator themselves, because the staff talk to each other as well.
There's a few more questions on this. And before we jump to them, I want to say the fact that this bill has an extraordinarily low likelihood of ever making it out of committee in the House, and therefore it's an extremely low likelihood that it would be passed this year, does not make it unworthy of advocacy. Because the question you have to ask yourself is, how do you get from a bill like this, how do you get to passage? And many bills are introduced in multiple sessions of Congress before they're able to be passed. This is a bill that is underscoring an important barrier that people are facing to being able to cast their ballots freely and fully and be able to participate in our democracy. And so it's a chance not only to build a relationship with a member of Congress and with their staff, but it's also, remember, you're carrying forward that argument in this very important time. So a couple other questions here. Follow-up question, is there a checklist or outline of key points to hit upon when meeting with legislatures? We're actually going to go into this a little bit after, so we wanted to role play first and then go in and take a look at some of the key pieces about why your voice matters and some of the ways to make that point. So hang on to that one.
And in the next role play, I'm going to be a staffer rather than the member.
That's great. Okay. So we're just, for simplicity's sake, going to do the same role play, but what's changing is now we're with Legislative Director Andrea Miller. How does that sound? Okay.
Oh, I like it.
All right. Good morning, Legislative Director. It's just a pleasure to meet you. My name is Noelle D'Amico. I'm with the Workers' Circle, a Jewish social justice organization, and I'm here with my colleagues, John Williams and Josie Riederer. And we're here to talk with you today about the People Above Long Lines Act.
Are any of you my boss's constituents? I know he's going to want to know.
Absolutely. We all are. I live in Blubbity Blub town in Blubbity blah blah. John, where are you from?
Oh, I live just a few minutes from there.
And Josie, you're around the block, aren't you?
I'm around the block. I went to high school with the congressperson's oldest son. So I grew up in the community and I'm an active participant and voter here.
Thank you
Right,
so
great.
much
Yeah.
for making time for us today. Josie's going to share a little bit about why this bill is so important to us.
Yeah, so the People Over Long Lines Act is really important to us in our community. And the main thing about it is that we have seen in the news, we've experienced this ourselves here during elections, that sometimes when we go to vote, it's not a 15-minute experience like we expect. Instead, we find ourselves waiting for sometimes 4+ hours to vote. And the People Over Long Lines Act would ensure that voters cannot wait for more than 30 minutes when voting. If they find themselves experiencing a wait time over 30 minutes, these voters also get a right to take action and file a complaint over the fact that they were waiting for too long to vote. In order to ensure that our states and our communities, I know our election workers in our state is underfunded with some of these resources, but the federal government would ensure that all states are given the money that they need to have up-to-date voting machines, more poll workers, and other resources necessary to ensure that this 30-minute goal is actually feasible. These are just some.
Wait a minute, I have a question. People told us they wanted to have early voting so that we could get rid of this problem with long lines. People aren't early voting and we've got problems with long lines. Why don't they take advantage of early voting? You wanted to do early voting, you got early voting. What is this new thing?
This is a great question. Well, for example, in 2020 in Georgia, they had early voting. They had, I think it's about 2 weeks of early voting in Georgia. But when some people wait, I'm young, I often procrastinate and I vote on election day. Sometimes that's the only time that people get off of work to go and vote. So even if you have early voting, it doesn't mean it's as feasible for people to go and cast a ballot. Another thing is that early voting, sometimes those locations are kind of out of reach, and often your election day polling precinct is closer. So people are still going to show up and vote on election day, even with early voting. And that means that they're going to be long lines nonetheless.
All right, yeah, I'll buy that. I know where I live, my polling location is like 3 minutes from my house, where if I wanted to go an early vote, that's a 20-minute drive. I'll give you that one. Okay. Keep going.
Absolutely. But there are also just real barriers that people face when they go to cast their ballot and suddenly find themselves in these long lines. And John's going to share a little bit about his mom's experience.
Thanks for meeting with us. Yes, as Noah was saying, I have a family member that would love to exercise their civic duty and vote. However, they uh, have a physical disability where they find it troublesome to wait and stand in long lines, and can be detrimental to their mental and physical health. I was wondering if you would consider our senior community and those who might not have the ability to move as freely as those at a younger age are blessed with sometimes. But I think their voices are just as important as mine, and coming to vote would be something that would also provide pride and dignity to community members in your district. So if you would please consider this, that would be great. Thank you.
And thank you for emphasizing the concept of civic duty. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You bet. Civic duty is an important motivator for so many people. And what we want to make sure is that when they go to the polls, they can actually cast their ballot. People with health issues, people who have served in the military and now are disabled, people who have the ability to come but maybe not make it for 4 hours. They can wait a little bit, but not 4 hours. It's very important to get this bill passed. I want to ask you whether you think the congressman would be willing to support the People Above Long Lines Act.
I will be happy to bring this bill to his attention. Normally, voting rights bills are not something that this office supports as a co-sponsor. I will be willing to have the discussion I will say that should this bill come up for a vote, there is a reasonable possibility that the congressman would vote yes.
Is there any information that would be helpful for you as you sit down and discuss this bill with the congressman? Anything that might lead him to consider stepping up and co-sponsoring this important legislation?
Well, there is going to be cost associated with this. And we are going to want to look at what is this going to cost? Early voting had a cost, and now there's going to be another cost on top of the costs that are already there. So that is most definitely a concern and will be a concern of any office where we are very strong fiscal conservatives. I am comfortable with the idea of making it easier for people to exercise their civic duty and responsibility. We are going to get uncomfortable with writing another blank check.
Well, goodness, this bill actually provides for the federal government to fund and ensure that states have the number of poll workers and equipment that they need. And that's part of why we're so confident that this bill would be successful. It's a way that we can help states meet their voters and ensure that every person's vote can be cast and counted.
We will be looking at any scoring from OMB on the cost of this bill. Because when you talk about the elections administration being funded by the federal government, we're uncomfortable with blank checks, whether they're coming from the federal government or whether they're coming from the state government. So we really are going to want to look at what is this going to cost.
Well,
So thank you very, very much for coming in. I had not personally heard about this legislation.
we're really glad that you made time to meet with us, and we'll be sure to follow up in email. I'll check and see if OMB has already scored this and provide that link to you if they have.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, and please give our
Thank you.
best to the congressman.
I
Thank you.
certainly will. Good day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so there we go.
Very different experience, right?
Yeah. Ken is asking right away, would we be able to provide expected costs or offer a GOA? What I would say is you don't need to worry over much. You can always go back and provide that information, just like we did. Andrea, do you have any thoughts on that?
You always want an excuse to come back. So when they ask, has this bill been scored? How much is it going to cost? This now gives you a reason to come back and present them with more information. Remember, part of the goal is we are building a relationship. So now, if they ask for something that you don't have, this is now a reason for a second date.
There you go. We're going to be walking through a few slides that just sum up some of the key points really quickly. And Andrea, also, if you can take a quick look in the chat as we
I'm
start
looking in the
through
chat
this.
right now.
Thank
Yes.
you. The important thing we want you to take away is that when elected officials hear from you in their district office or via Zoom with their district office, it really grounds your visit as their constituent. You are speaking directly to them by and large, regardless of party or position. They will be very respectful and very pleased to hear from you. Next slide. Your voice matters. Earlier, someone had asked, what are some important points to make? What's key here is not only you don't have to be an expert on the bill details. You want to be an expert on the why this matters to you, why this bill is important. Think about your own experience. Think about John, who talked about his mother's experience. Is this bill helping or hurting you directly? Do you know someone who has experienced long lines? Can you talk about that story? If you don't know a story, you might say it's simply wrong that in the 21st century in America, that any person has to wait in lines, particularly those who are elderly, those who are infirm, those who are disabled, those who might have other needs or inability to stand in line for any reason. So you can think about the values if you don't have a particular story. Legislators also want to be able to point to you. You introduce yourself and you tell your stories and you make your points, because then they go and they speak to others. We've seen stories that we've shared show up in argumentation on the Senate floor. Your stories are critical. Next slide. You're trying to influence, persuade, pressure, and be consistent and persistent. Remember, you want to start, you're not always going to get a yes. Maybe you'll get a maybe, and you want to push a little bit. So you saw when Andrea said, oh, well, I'm willing to talk to the member of Congress about that. I pushed a little bit and said, oh, what other information would you need? And we drew out, oh, the cost of this is going to be a driving factor. What else did you hear in that visit? You heard her say, I appreciate civic duty. So we've learned something. So even had she said, no way, no how, here's the door, thanks for meeting with me, we would have walked away with some information. It's kind of reconnaissance, right? So we go out and we say, okay, these are the two key pieces that really matter to this member of Congress. Next slide. So you want to take a no and turn it into a maybe, and you want to take a maybe and turn it into yes, and you want to turn your yes into how can we build support. So in the first visit, the Congresswoman said, I'm happy to reach out to some others. And we said, how can we be helpful? What would be the best way? We talked back and forth. That's the kind of discussion. You never want to just leave it with a yes. Wherever there's a yes, there are more yeses to be found. And Congresspeople have relationships that they have built over the years with one another. And that's one of the most effective ways to bring more power and support to a bill. Next slide. Andrea, talk a little bit about legislators. I'm on a roll, but let me kick it to you for a moment. I don't want to hog up all our slides at the end.
Oh, no, I was enjoying this. I was enjoying this. All right. And again, what Noel was saying before, you want to learn more about the legislator. Over the 4 years that I spent getting to know Congressman Walter Jones, we developed kind of a trusting relationship. He trusted that when I would come and talk to him about legislation, I was telling him all the parts of the bill, including there might be some pieces of the legislation that he wasn't really going to be supportive of. But overall, if the concept was democracy, or the concept was, he used to call it supporting the American dream, he would be willing to listen. So you find out very quickly what are the values. Congressman Walter Jones was a Republican who absolutely hated the notion of war. He wasn't a Quaker, but during what was it, the Iraq War, he met so many family members of people that had lost loved ones, and he heard the stories. He became one of the most pro-peace legislators I ever met in Congress. And whenever I had peace bills, I could take them to Congressman Jones first, talk to him. And then there were a group of representatives that he could talk to, and we could get Republicans on those bills faster than we got Democrats on.
The key is really that relationship building. And the great news is anybody can do it. Every single one of you here has the capacity and the ability to build a relationship. So it may be that your first visit, you go by yourself and you have a quick meeting one-on-one with one of the staffers, and you're just introducing yourself. And then maybe the next time you come, you might have another person with you, or maybe you have some more signatures on the letter that you're dropping off, and you'll get more comfortable with it, and they'll remember you. They'll say, "Oh, hi, it's great to see you." And you'll feel that sense of momentum. Next slide. We mentioned the team roles and explained those and demonstrated those. Please know you're going to get all of these slides in the follow-up email. Next slide. We want to make sure you know the logistics of setting up a meeting. You want to make an official request via email and then follow up with a call. Sometimes what you do is you go to their website and they'll provide a form by which you request a meeting. That's often the best and quickest way to do it, but don't wait for them to get back to you. Give them a day, then make a phone call to that office and say, "Hey, I sent in a request and I'd like to set something up." You can meet with the legislature, or as Andrea had said, the staffer who handles voting rights is really a very important person to know. Sometimes you'll luck out and get the legislative director, who ultimately is making the calls on which bills are taking priority and is the person that is really whispering in the ear of that elected official about what to support and also what not to support. One of the easiest ways, if you're going by yourself, to say there's some people behind me, they may not be here, but they care about this too, is to take the letter that we're going to send to you an email and just get a few more signatures. Just have the person write their name, and they might write their address with it. That way it demonstrates that they're a constituent in the district. Next slide. And you can find all the information on the wonderful World Wide Web. So you'll be able to find your senator at senate.gov. You'll be able to find your House member. And remember, on this bill, you are welcome to visit both your senator and your member of the House. We really have very few senators on this bill, and it would be wonderful to get a whole bunch more. Next slide. When you follow up, you heard me at the end say, "You have my card, I'll get back to you an email," all of those kinds of things. In the last visit, I said, "Oh, I'll look up that OMB scoring and I'll get that to you." You always want to go back to them after the visit. You thank them. You reiterate your ask. You say what you heard in the meeting. We're so glad that you're going to speak with the senator about this bill. Here's the OMB information you asked for, or I will follow up further with OMB information. And then you send it off. What I will tell you is we've done this over and over with the Worker Circle. And back during COVID, when we were doing Zoom meetings, Senator Toomey's office had met with us on a bill, and they totally disagreed with us on this bill. Like, they was going nowhere. But guess what? In January, they were interested in how immigrants were experiencing COVID and whether they needed more protections, and reached back out to us because they knew we had already shared some stories around that. And we were able to equip them with further stories about the importance of protecting immigrants during COVID. So all of this, again, is about building a relationship, trying to find common ground, and being persistent, not giving up. Let's go to the next slide. As we close our time together, I want to make sure that you know about some wonderful events that will buttress everything you've been learning tonight. One, we're going to be having a Build Power Start a Democracy Circle event next Thursday. Democracy circles are small groups of people where you invite your friends together to learn and take action for our democracy, and the Worker Circle will support you along the way. Later in April, we're going to be having a conversation with voting rights expert and journalist Ari Berman called Minority Rule. He has a brand new book, and we're the first stop on his book tour. And Andrea, I'm so happy that the Center for Common Ground is one of the co-sponsors of this event. I hope you will check this out. And then finally, I hope you'll join us and bring a friend next month for our May How to Be an Effective Citizen Advocate from Your Hometown. We'll have another piece of legislation, and we'll have another role play. And we're going to be looking at all the responses that you gave to us tonight to continue to improve and offer different ways that you can learn how to be an effective advocate. We're so grateful for all of you who have already made visits on these important pieces of legislation. We are really grateful for all of you who came for the first time tonight, and we hope we'll see you back again.
Almost definitely. And I dropped a little link, a little question in the chat. Did you enjoy / learn from the role play? This was so much fun. I absolutely loved this format. I hope our attendees did too. As I said, this is a brand new format for us. Oh, for me, it was so much fun.
Hooray, I'm seeing people liked it too.
Yeah,
We'll keep playing
yay.
around with this, and be sure, let us know if you have an idea for how to make our effective advocate more effective. Let us know. Please reach out to us. When you get the follow-up email, you can email us back and say, hey, I think it would be great to see this or that. We would just love to hear from you. Thank you again. Thank you for your commitment to our democracy, and thank you also to John and Josie for doing that role play tonight. I look forward to seeing you soon. If not next month, then maybe at one of the other programs. Keep up the great work. Keep sending in postcards. Those of you who are doing postcards, get ready to phone bank. Those of you who are getting
Phone
ready to
banking
phone bank.
starts next week for Georgia. We
Yep.
are working on the scripts right now. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're excited about that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.